Imagine, for a moment, stepping back in time, not to a romanticized past, but to a world teetering on the edge of monumental change. A world where empires clashed and the fate of nations hung by a thread. We are going to plunge into one of history's most harrowing sagas, a tale of defiance, strategic brilliance, and unimaginable devastation. In the year 588 before the Common Era, picture Jerusalem, a vibrant city, a beacon of faith, home to approximately 75,000 souls. They lived within what they believed to be the most secure walls of the ancient world. 12 meters high, thick, formidable, built of solid stone. This city boasted food reserves sufficient for years, a disciplined, trained army ready to defend its people. And most importantly, the profound conviction that they lived under the direct protection of their God. It felt impregnable, a fortress of faith and stone. Yet, a mere 18 months later, a chilling truth emerged. Only 10,000 of those 75,000 inhabitants remained alive. How could this be? How could a city so fortified, so divinely assured, be brought to its knees, utterly erased from the map, in less than 2 short years? It seems impossible, doesn't it? A story that defies logic and challenges belief. But the answer, my friends, doesn't lie in brute force alone. It lies in something far more insidious, far more calculated. Strategy. Because Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, did not attack Jerusalem like any other conqueror. He orchestrated a plan so meticulously calculated, so shockingly brutal, that it continues to be studied by military strategists even today. He didn't just wage war, he transformed destruction into an exact science. The Babylonian army, under Nebuchadnezzar's command, was unlike anything the ancient world had ever witnessed. It wasn't merely a collection of warriors. It was a devastating machine. Picture this. 180,000 soldiers, each one a cog in a meticulously honed engine of war. These weren't just men. They were specialists trained for one singular purpose, to dismantle entire cities. Ancient writings from that era, like the words of prophet Jeremiah, described them as an unstoppable force, sweeping down from the north like a raging storm, devouring everything in its path. Can you visualize that? A tempest of men and steel, consuming all hope and resistance in its relentless advance. But this wasn't simply a matter of overwhelming numbers. Oh no, this was a technological marvel of warfare, a terrifying display of innovation that no enemy could hope to withstand. Imagine their catapults. Colossal machines capable of launching 90-kilogram boulders over 200 meters. Think about the sheer impact, the deafening crash as these massive stones tore through buildings, through walls, through lives. Their battering rams were equally monstrous, weighing more than 20 oxen combined. Picture these behemoths, swinging with relentless force, smashing through bronze gates as if they were nothing more than dry twigs, splintering centuries of craftsmanship in mere moments. And their siege towers? Towering structures reaching 30 meters into the sky, taller than a 10-story building today. From these platforms, archers rained down death, and soldiers poured into the breaches they created. A haunting passage in the ancient texts, in chapter 4, verse 13, describes this unstoppable force. Behold, he comes up like clouds, his chariots like a whirlwind. His horses are swifter than eagles. Woe to us, for we are ruined. But what was truly terrifying, what truly set Nebuchadnezzar apart, was his method. He didn't improvise. Every single attack, every maneuver, adhered to a carefully refined manual of war, a blueprint for destruction tested and perfected over dozens of conquered cities. Think of Nineveh, Ashkelon, Lachish, all fell using the exact same devastating methodology. Nebuchadnezzar had, without doubt, transformed the art of war into a precise, calculated science of obliteration. If you're finding this deep dive into ancient history as captivating as we are, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more untold stories to light. Just click that subscribe button below. Now, you might be asking yourself, why? Why would an empire as vast and powerful as Babylon, with Nebuchadnezzar at its helm, dedicate so much time, so many resources, to a seemingly insignificant city like Jerusalem? On the surface, Jerusalem was small, relatively poor compared to the opulent grandeur of Babylon. So, what drove Nebuchadnezzar to spend years relentlessly pursuing its destruction? The answer, as is often the case with history, lies not just in the visible, but in the strategic currents that shaped the ancient world. Jerusalem's true value wasn't in its size or its wealth. It was in its location. Look at any ancient map of the region, and you'll see it. Jerusalem sat precisely in the middle of the crucial trade route connecting Babylon and Egypt, the two superpowers of that era. Whoever controlled Jerusalem controlled the vital flow of commerce and communication between continents. It was a geopolitical linchpin, a strategic crossroads that could not be ignored. More critically, Jerusalem was an ally of Egypt, Nebuchadnezzar's greatest rival. Ancient writings, such as those in 2 Kings, chapter 24, verse 7, tell us that the king of Egypt never again came out his land, for the king of Babylon had taken all that belonged to the king of Egypt from the brook of Egypt to the river Euphrates. Nebuchadnezzar understood that as long as Jerusalem stood, Egypt would always have a potential base of operations, a foothold in his sphere of influence. It was like having a dagger constantly pointed at his back, a persistent threat to his regional dominance. But there was another, perhaps even more potent, driving force: pride. The sheer audacity of Jerusalem's defiance infuriated Nebuchadnezzar. Other kings, other nations, trembled at the mere mention of his name, surrendered at his approach.
And I will pour
Yet,
out my spirit
the people
on
of
all
Jerusalem,
flesh.
buoyed by their faith,
Your sons
declared
and
that
your
their
daughters
God was
shall
greater
prophesy.
than any army, any empire. This was an affront Nebuchadnezzar could not tolerate. For him, the annihilation of Jerusalem wasn't just a military imperative. It was a profound demonstration of power, a brutal message to the entire world. No city, no matter how protected, no matter how fervent its faith, could ever dare to challenge the might of Babylon. But Nebuchadnezzar was far too intelligent, far too cunning, to launch a direct, head-on assault immediately. His genius lay in his patience, his ability to apply a devastating psychological blow of force. He didn't arrive at Jerusalem with battering rams at the gates. He arrived with a deceptive smile, a veneer of generosity. In 605, before the Common Era, his mighty legions surrounded Jerusalem. The people braced for war, for the familiar sounds of siege engines and war cries. But the attack never came. Instead, the Babylonian king extended an offer, one that seemed remarkably benevolent. "Hand over some of your noblest young men," he proposed, "to be educated in Babylon, and I will leave your city in peace." King Jehoiakim, perhaps blinded by relief or short-sightedness, accepted immediately. From his perspective, it seemed like a favorable deal, saving the entire city by simply yielding a few promising youths. The ancient texts in chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, record Nebuchadnezzar's command that he should bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and the nobility, used without blemish, of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace. Among those tragically taken were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, some of Jerusalem's brightest minds. Jehoiakim believed he had struck a clever bargain. He had saved his city, so he thought, by offering only a small group of young men. But Nebuchadnezzar was infinitely more astute. He didn't merely want hostages. He wanted to cripple Jerusalem's future. By taking its most intelligent, most capable young people, he ensured that the next generation of leaders would be shaped and indoctrinated in Babylon, not in Judah. He was sowing seeds of submission, guaranteeing that the very spirit of independence would wither. And there was another, deeper consequence. By accepting this generous offer, King Jehoiakim had, in essence, declared himself a vassal of Nebuchadnezzar. Jerusalem, without realizing it, had just surrendered its independence. The first blow against the city wasn't military. It was psychological, a masterstroke of political cunning, and it worked flawlessly. What do you think of Nebuchadnezzar's initial strategy? Was it brilliant or simply cruel? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. But 3 years later, a fatal error, a terrible miscalculation, would force Nebuchadnezzar to return with a vengeance. King Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim's successor, reigned for a mere 3 months. Then, in March of 597 before the Common Era, Nebuchadnezzar himself arrived. This time, there was no pretense of generosity, no room for negotiation. This time, he came with his entire, terrifying army. The young king, just 18 years old, looked down from the towering walls of Jerusalem. What he saw must have been a sight of overwhelming terror. An endless multitude of soldiers stretching the horizon, a sea of bronze and iron, a relentless force that blotted out the very land. The ancient texts in 2 Kings chapter 24, verses 10 and 11 confirm this. At that time the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up to Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. Jehoiakim's reign and Jerusalem's hope lasted exactly 3 days. On the third day, he did something unprecedented for a king of Jerusalem. He opened the gates and surrendered voluntarily. The writings in 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 12, record. Then Jehoiakim the king of Judah went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants and his officials and his palace functionaries. And the king of Babylon took him captive. Nebuchadnezzar was reportedly surprised. He had anticipated resistance, a desperate, valiant fight. Instead, he found total capitulation. The strategy of progressive siege, of psychological erosion, had utterly broken Jerusalem's morale. Fear, it turned out, was a far more effective weapon than any catapult. Nebuchadnezzar seized the opportunity, plundering the temple for the very first time. He took a portion of its sacred utensils, loading 50 carts with gold and silver. But even more significantly, he took Jehoiakim alive, a humiliated king, a living trophy to be paraded back to Babylon. The king of Jerusalem had become a prisoner of war. This was the second time Nebuchadnezzar had brought Jerusalem to its knees, but it was still not enough. Nebuchadnezzar didn't kill Jehoiakim. He had a far more cunning, far more devastating plan. Instead of executing the captured king, he implemented a tactic that had systematically destroyed other nations, the mass deportation of its most vital citizens. The ancient texts in 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 14, lists the precise numbers and types of people taken. He carried away all Jerusalem and all the captains and all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives and all the craftsmen and smiths. None remained except the poorest people of the land. 10,000 people. But these weren't just any people. Nebuchadnezzar specifically targeted the leaders, the intellectuals, the skilled artisans, the warriors, anyone who possessed the knowledge to govern, the strength to fight, or the expertise to build. They were all ripped from Jerusalem. Among the deported was the prophet Ezekiel, who would later describe in vivid, heartbreaking detail the city's final, cataclysmic destruction. The plan was a stroke of cruel genius. Leave behind only the poorest people of the land, simple farmers, shepherds, laborers, people who lacked the leadership, the organizational skills, the resources to mount a rebellion. Nebuchadnezzar then installed Zedekiah, Jehoiakim's uncle, as a puppet king. Zedekiah was a weak man, easily controlled from a distance by the iron fist of Babylon. For 11 long years, this strategy worked perfectly. Jerusalem became a ghost of its former self, governed by a king stripped of real power, inhabited only by the most vulnerable. Nebuchadnezzar believed he had solved the Jerusalem problem forever. But Zedekiah was about to make a monumental mistake, an act of sheer folly that would compel Nebuchadnezzar to return for a third time, and this time it would be to utterly erase everything. For 11 years, Zedekiah had been the perfect puppet king. He paid his tributes, followed orders, and kept Jerusalem quiet. Nebuchadnezzar was content. The Jerusalem problem seemed to have vanished. But then, in 588 before the Common Era, Zedekiah made the blunder of the century. He rebelled against Babylon. What could possibly drive a weak puppet king to challenge the most powerful empire in the world? 2 words: popular pressure and seductive, empty promises of Egypt. Ancient writings in Jeremiah, chapter 37, verse 5, shed light on this. Then Pharaoh's army came out of Egypt, and when the Chaldeans who were besieging Jerusalem heard the report about them, they withdrew from Jerusalem. The people of Jerusalem saw the approaching Egyptian army, and a desperate hope ignited within them. They believed they finally had a strong ally, a lifeline. They pressured Zedekiah relentlessly to break his covenant with Babylon, and Zedekiah tragically succumbed to that pressure. 2 Kings Chapter 24, verse 20, plainly states, "For because of the wrath of the Lord this happened in Jerusalem and Judah, until he cast them out from his presence. And Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon." It was the most costly mistake in the history of Judah. When Nebuchadnezzar received news of his betrayal, his reaction was explosive. No more deals, no more vassalage, no more second chances. This time, he would come to wipe Jerusalem off the map entirely. And the plan Nebuchadnezzar devised of final destruction was so utterly brutal that even his own generals were reportedly shocked. If you believe that justice, even if delayed, always finds its way, comment justice prevails below and share your conviction. In January of 588 before the Common Era, Nebuchadnezzar once again surrounded Jerusalem. He deployed a strategy that had never failed him, a relentless and unforgiving vice. But this time, his objective was different. He didn't seek vassalage or tribute. He sought total annihilation. The ancient historical accounts, in 2 Kings, chapter 25, marked the terrifying beginning of the nightmare. It states, "Now in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came, he and all his army, against Jerusalem and encamped by it." This siege was not chaotic. It was a masterpiece of military engineering. Nebuchadnezzar ordered the construction of a massive circumvallation wall around Jerusalem, a city encircling another city. Imagine that, a barrier so complete, so impenetrable, that not a single person, not an animal, not a solitary grain of food could enter or leave. The prophet Jeremiah, in chapter 52, verses 4 and 5, vividly describes this. "So they built siege ramps against it all around, and the city was under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. Nebuchadnezzar divided his immense army into relentless 24-hour shifts. While one contingent attacked the walls with ceaseless fury, another rested, prepared to take its place. The pressure on Jerusalem was constant, unyielding day and night. There was no pause, no moment of respite. But the true stroke of genius? Nebuchadnezzar was in no hurry. He knew that time, that most merciless of adversaries, was entirely on his side. Jerusalem had enough food for a few months. Perhaps. He, however, had provisions for years. Jerusalem's morale was plummeting, already shattered by years of subservience and the sting of betrayal. He had soldiers whose spirits were high, motivated by the promise of unimaginable plunder. It was a simple, brutal calculation. Every passing week, Jerusalem grew weaker, its defenses more frayed, its people more desperate. And with each passing week, Nebuchadnezzar's resolve only hardened. He knew that starvation would do the work of thousands of soldiers, breaking the city from within long before his attackers felt the strain of exhaustion. Jerusalem, in its long, proud history, had boasted of its walls. Constructed of solid, massive stone, they had resisted countless attacks for centuries. They were a symbol of endurance, a testament to faith. But Nebuchadnezzar had studied every single stone, every joint, every angle. In his previous sieges, his engineers had meticulously mapped every weak point, every hidden fissure, every vulnerable angle of Jerusalem's formidable defenses. These walls, 12 meters high and 6 meters thick, were impressive, yes, but not, he knew, impossible. Nebuchadnezzar brought forth his most advanced siege machines, gigantic battering rams, mounted on mobile towers, lumbered towards the gates. Catapults launched not just stones, but incendiary projectiles, raining fire and terror upon the defenders. And specialized sappers, master tunnelers, began to undermine the very foundations of the city. Jeremiah, in chapter 32, verse 24, describes the chilling effectiveness of their methods. "Behold, the siege mounds have been raised against the city to take it, and the city is given into the hand of the Chaldeans who are fighting against it." The strategy was a simultaneous assault on 3 critical points: the weaker north gate, the towering east tower, and the southern foundation built precariously on rocky terrain. While the battering rams hammered relentlessly at the gates, the sappers burrowed tunnels beneath, weakening the very bases of the walls. The catapults, with their constant barrage of projectiles, kept the desperate defenders pinned down, unable to mount effective counterattacks. For months, the walls seemed to hold, an agonizing test of endurance. But Nebuchadnezzar relied not just on brute force, but on the cold, hard logic of mathematics. Each blow of a battering ram, each impact of a catapult stone, created microfractures, loosened mortar, slowly, inexorably, eroding the structural integrity. Each day of tunneling undermined the foundations a little more. The once impenetrable walls were crumbling slowly but surely, and when they finally fell, the massacre everyone knew would be inevitable. Then Nebuchadnezzar unleashed his most devastating weapon, famine. This silent killer would prove more lethal than any army, more brutal than any siege engine. In the first month of the siege, Jerusalem began rationing its dwindling food supplies. By the third month, the people were desperately eating tree bark, anything to quell the gnawing hunger. By the 6th month, the unthinkable had begun. They were boiling leather from sandals, trying to extract any last shred of sustenance. Ancient records in 2 Kings chapter 25, verse 3, paint a stark picture. On the 9th day of the 4th month of famine, it was so severe in the city that there was no food for people to land.
Your sons
But the
and your
horror was
daughters
only
shall
just
prophesy.
beginning. The book of Lamentations, chapter 4, verse 10, describes an unimaginable atrocity. The hands of compassionate women have cooked their own children. They became food for them in the destruction of the daughter of my people. Can you truly comprehend that? Mothers, driven mad by starvation, forced to cook their own infants. Families fighting over moldy crumbs. Corpses accumulating in the streets, decaying under the relentless sun, because no one had the strength left to bury them. Nebuchadnezzar, from his command tower, observed it all. He knew precisely what was unfolding within Jerusalem's crumbling walls. His spies, refugees fleeing the city, brought back chilling tales of cannibalism and utter despair. The Babylonian king felt no pity. He saw it merely as an effective, strategic outcome. The book of Lamentations, chapter 2, verse 20, cries out in agony, "See, O Lord, and consider, to whom have you done thus? Should women eat their offspring, the children they caressed?" When Jerusalem's remaining soldiers, emaciated and weak, could no longer even hold their swords, Nebuchadnezzar knew he had won. Famine had accomplished what thousands of warriors could not. After 18 agonizing months, the moment arrived that Nebuchadnezzar had patiently awaited, the final breach in the wall. If you're shocked by the depths of human suffering and the brutality of ancient warfare, please share this video. Let others witness this critical piece of history. In the pre-dawn hours of July 18th, 586 before the Common Era, the nightmare Jerusalem had dreaded for 18 long months became a horrifying reality. The wall cracked. Jeremiah, in chapter 52, verse 7, records the exact agonizing moment. Then the city was broken into, and all the men of war fled. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, not a sudden, thunderous implosion. It was a 3-meter-wide fissure in the north wall, just large enough for 10 soldiers to pass through side by side. The exhausted, starving guards of Jerusalem saw the breach, and a cry of pure, unadulterated terror echoed to the dying city. The wall has fallen. The wall has fallen. Panic, absolute and overwhelming, seized the remaining inhabitants. King Zedekiah, desperate, attempted to organize a final, desperate defense. But his soldiers were too weak, too famished to fight. Many simply threw down their swords and ran, seeking any escape from the inevitable. The first Babylonians to pour through the breach were archers. They swiftly scaled the remaining towers, raining arrows down upon the fleeing defenders, ensuring no organized escape. Within 2 hours, Jerusalem's organized resistance had utterly collapsed. 2 Kings, chapter 25, verse 4, describes the ensuing chaos. Then a breach was made in the city, and all the men of war fled by night by the way of the gate between the 2 walls, which was by the king's garden. Zedekiah, the puppet king who had sealed the city's fate, did the only thing left for him. He fled, a coward in the face of utter defeat. Nebuchadnezzar watched the invasion unfold from the strategic vantage point of his royal tent. After years of meticulous planning, 6 months of constructing monstrous war machines, and 18 months of brutal siege, Jerusalem had finally fallen. But the city's fall was merely the beginning. Now came the part Nebuchadnezzar had most eagerly anticipated. Now came the reckoning. Nebuchadnezzar forced Zedekiah to witness the unthinkable, a spectacle of ultimate degradation and despair. First, They brought forth the king's sons, young princes who were destined one day to inherit the throne of Judah. Zedekiah, broken and defeated, begged for their lives. He offered gold. He promised eternal vassalage, anything to spare his children. Nebuchadnezzar said nothing, merely gestured to the executioner. 2 Kings, chapter 25, verse 7, records a chilling act with stark simplicity. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and then put out the eyes of Zedekiah and bound him with bronze fetters and took him to Babylon. The anguished screams of Zedekiah, raw with parental grief and horror, echoed through the Babylonian encampment. But the worst was yet to come. After executing the children, Nebuchadnezzar ordered the systematic killing of all the nobles of Judah who had been captured. Jeremiah, chapter 52, verse 10, confirms this. The king of Babylon slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and also slaughtered all the princes of Judah at Riblah. It was a complete, utter extinction of Judah's royal lineage, a final, definitive severing of its past and future. Finally, the ultimate punishment for Zedekiah himself. Babylonian soldiers gouged out his eyes with searing hot iron. The last image the king of Jerusalem ever saw was the blood of his own children pooling on the ground. Nebuchadnezzar ensured that Zedekiah would spend the remainder of his life in blindness, forever haunted by the memory of the moment he lost everything because of his betrayal. This was Babylonian justice, ruthless and absolute. Those who broke solemn oaths would lose everything. Those who betrayed their allies would pay with blood. But Nebuchadnezzar was far from finished. The next target was the spiritual heart of Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar deliberately saved the temple for last, and for profound reason. He wanted to break the very soul of Israel. The magnificent Temple of Solomon was more than just a building. It was the sacred symbol of God's dwelling among the Jewish people. To destroy it would mean, in the eyes of the world, to prove that the God of Israel had abandoned his people, that he was powerless against the might of Babylon. On August 5th, 586 before the Common Era, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the Babylonian guard, entered the temple. He came with torches, with axes, with a cold, methodical purpose. 2 Kings, chapter 25, verse 9 records, he burned the house of the Lord and the king's house and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every great house he burned down. First, they meticulously plundered everything of value. The towering bronze columns, Jachin and Boaz, were shattered and carried away in pieces. The enormous bronze sea, a colossal basin weighing 30 tons, was broken apart with gigantic hammers. Jeremiah, chapter 52, verse 17, lists the inventory of the sacred plunder. And the Chaldeans broke in pieces the bronze pillars that were in the house of the Lord, and the stands and the bronze sea that were in the house of the Lord, and carried all the bronze to Babylon. The gold utensils, the sacred cups, the basins, the candelabras.
And I will pour
they
out
filled
my
200
spirit
carts
on
with these
all
priceless
flesh.
treasures.
Your
But what
sons and
reportedly
your
shocked
daughters
even
shall
hardened
prophesy.
Babylonian soldiers was when Nebuzaradan gave the order to burn the Holy of Holies. This, the most sacred place on earth, where God's presence was believed to reside, turned to ashes in a matter of hours. The fire raged for 3 days, a terrifying inferno whose smoke could be seen 50 kilometers away. Jews hiding in the surrounding mountains watched in helpless horror, knowing that an era had come to an agonizing end. Lamentations, chapter 2, verse 7, echoes the unbearable pain. The Lord has spurned his altar. He has rejected his sanctuary. He has delivered into the hand of the enemy the walls of her palaces. 1,000 years of sacred history, of faith and devotion, turned to dust in 72 agonizing hours. If you're still with us and truly moved by this historical account, please give this video a like. Your engagement helps us immensely, but the destruction of the temple, as horrific as it was merely the prelude to the even deeper nightmare that followed. For the women who survived the initial massacre, death might have been a mercy. Lamentations, chapter 5, verse 11, records the unspeakable horror without equivocation. They ravished the women in Zion, the virgins in the cities of Judah. Nebuchadnezzar had given his soldiers 3 days of free reign, 3 days of unbridled plunder and brutality. This included doing whatever they wished with the captured women. Wives of nobles, who had lived in palatial splendor, were raped by soldiers whose hands were still stained with blood. Daughters of priests were violated in the ruined courtyards of the very temple where they had once worshipped. Mothers, desperately trying to protect their infants, were brutalized in front of their own children. The youngest and most beautiful were singled out, separated from their families, destined to be sold as sex slaves in the bustling markets of Babylon. The older women were forced to carry the spoils of their own city, their own homes, now the property of their conquerors. Lamentations, chapter 1, verse 18, cries out, "Hear, all you peoples, and see my suffering. My virgins and my young men have gone into captivity. Those who dared to resist were killed on the spot. Those who submitted were branded with hot iron, marked as property of the Babylonian army. Mothers lost children. Daughters lost mothers. Sisters were torn apart, forever separated." Lamentations, chapter 1, verse 16, expresses an indescribable grief. "For these things I weep, my eye runs down with water." Hundreds of women, who had once been respected queens, princesses, and daughters of wealthy merchants, walked in chains through the devastated streets of their own destroyed city. They carried on their backs the gold and silver from their own homes, now the stolen spoils of Nebuchadnezzar. But even this profound human suffering was not the primary focus of the Babylonian king. He sought something even more tangible, even more valuable, all the accumulated wealth of Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar did not come to Jerusalem merely to conquer territory. He came to seize 400 years of accumulated wealth. The plundering was meticulous, organized with the cold precision of a military operation. Jeremiah, chapter 52, verses 17 to 20, provides a detailed inventory of the immense theft. The bronze pillars, the stands, the bronze sea, the pots, the shovels, the snuffers, the dishes, all of gold and all of silver, from the temple alone. The Babylonians reportedly discovered 650 tons of pure gold and 1,300 tons of silver, thousands of sacred utensils, precious stones encrusted in the walls. In the royal palaces, they plundered the treasures of 20 generations of kings, the crown jewels of David and Solomon, the gold reserves of the national treasury, ivory, exotic spices, and fine fabrics. 2 Kings, chapter 25, verses 13 to 15, again details the extent. The bronze pillars which were in the house of the Lord, and the stands, and the bronze sea which were in the house of the Lord. The Chaldeans broke in pieces, and carried the bronze to Babylon, also the bowls, and the fire pans, and the basins, and the pots, and the lampstands, and the cups, and the drink offerings. All that was of gold, and all that was of silver, the captain of the guard took away. Nebuchadnezzar deployed 500 carts dedicated solely to transporting these precious metals. The convoy of wealth stretched for an astonishing 15 kilometers. The bitter irony? Much of this gold had been voluntarily given by the Jewish people, offered as sacred gifts to their God. Now, it would finance pagan temples in Babylon, adorning the idols of foreign deities. Lamentations chapter 1, verse 10, expresses his profound bitterness. The adversary has stretched out his hand against all her precious things, for she has seen that the nations have entered her sanctuary. In a single, devastating week, Nebuchadnezzar stole what Jerusalem had taken centuries to accumulate. The city built with the legendary gold of Ophir was reduced to dust. The wealth meant to honor God ended up decorating the palaces of idols. But stealing wealth was not enough. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to ensure that no Jewish person would ever reconstruct Jerusalem again. What an incredible yet devastating account. Subscribe to our channel if you want to explore more such powerful stories from history. August of 586 before the Common Era. For the first time in over 1,000 years, Jerusalem stood utterly, profoundly empty. No human voice echoed through its ruins. No smoke curled from a cooking fire. No joyous sound of children playing broke the eerie silence. There was only the devastation, smoldering rubble, the skeletal remains of buildings, and the mournful sound of the wind whistling to the gaping holes in its shattered walls. The Book of Lamentations, chapter 1, verse 1, perfectly captures this profound desolation. How lonely sits the city that was once full of people. She has become like a widow, she who was great among the nations. Nebuchadnezzar's plan had worked with terrifying perfection. Jerusalem had ceased to exist as a city, as a nation, and as a perceived threat. But amidst the silence, amidst the ashes, one question lingered, a question that perhaps even Nebuchadnezzar himself could not fully answer. Why? Why did the God of Israel allow this to happen to his own people? What deeper meaning lay within this cataclysmic destruction? This is merely one chapter in a story that intertwines faith, power, and human resilience. What happened next? How did the people of Judah survive exile? And what became of Nebuchadnezzar himself?